welcome to the Manic Pixie Dream Podcast. I'm your host, Caroline Georges. Today we have a sit-down with conservative author Michael Walsh and talk about his book, The Fiery Angel, which is the sequel to his book, The Devil's Pleasure Palace, where he has a harsh critical take on sociology and his thoughts on his perceived shortcomings of sociology. It's a very interesting topic to go over, and we also go over abuse in Hollywood and the sociology of sorts that goes behind creativity and in creative processes of filmmakers. Anyways, enjoy the conversation and enjoy the next hour of your life. And like and subscribe and enjoy the episode. Have a lovely day. Goodbye. Hello, and welcome to the Manic Pixie Dream Podcast. I'm Caroline Georges, and here with me today is conservative author Michael Walsh, and a very dear friend of mine and a mentor. He has been an amazing friend to me. He's read everything I've ever written. He's always encouraged me. He's always been there for me since I've been in school. And he has so much to say about arts and politics. And I am so excited to have him here today to talk.
No, it's great to be with you here.
Thank you,
Caroline.
Michael.
Yeah.
Thank you.
All right, you ready to fight?
Yes.
Okay, good.
Okay. So since the Me Too movement with Harvey Weinstein and stuff, like the kind of like creativity and artistic environments have kind of, and censorship have kind of become hot topics.
Right.
And I guess since the Me Too movement, what was your initial response to the Me Too accusations that started coming out in waves?
Well, obviously, if what's been alleged against Harvey Weinstein is true, he's a criminal. So
Yes.
That will have to be adjudicated in a court of law, and we will see how it all develops. But clearly, Hollywood has always been a place where, how can I phrase this delicately, there was a certain amount of understanding of exchange going on in an industry that prizes ruthlessness and aggression and is highly sexed. It sells sex to the public, literally.
Yeah, exactly.
So no one should be surprised that there are no virgins in this particular bordello. And if you expect that they are, then that there would be, then you've come to the wrong industry.
Yes, that's true.
Now, whether it's caught up a lot of people, both men and women now, in its talons, and we'll have to see what the end result is. I think the most disturbing thing about what's happened with the reports by Ronan Farrow and others
Yes.
is that men are going to be less willing to work with women, more suspicious of them, never be alone with them, and it's going to hurt women's equal opportunity in business because the sexes are going to self-segregate. If every single woman is a potential hand grenade that can explode in your face, as we saw with Justice Kavanaugh's confirmation, where this woman came out of left field with completely unprovable allegations from 36 years ago about something that would not be a crime any longer, even if it had happened, because it would be past the statute of limitations. If that can happen and create the spectacle that we saw, then I think both sexes are going to be wary of any kind of interaction, and then you're back to where women are, not in the workforce anymore, or they have their own entire separate and distinct workforces, just as they once had separate and distinct educational systems. So I think we tend not to think these things through when we get into a fit of moral high dudgeon. But there's much larger ramifications to it than just the possible criminal behavior of one or more people.
Sure. I mean, I'm kind of in conflict about the whole Justice Kavanaugh thing because he wasn't like going to be in a place of power over justice and stuff. And if he has a history, I mean, I wonder if that's something that's a need to know thing. Like somebody coming forward, just so you know, this guy did something. Maybe be aware. Mm-hmm. I don't know. I think everyone deserves a fair trial, and no one deserves their career to be ruined over an accusation. And
especially an uncorroborated and unsourced accusation.
Yeah, and but at the same time, like I remember working on a shoot. He was producing a short film at AFI.
And he had a female director who was very actively, feminist, and she and they needed a body double for this short film where there was like gay mermaids, and that was kind of it was like a fairy tale about mermaids that were lesbians and stuff. So I had to, they asked me to be the body double because the actress who wasn't available to do because they had you had to do special effects and stuff. So I was there, and I was, there for my friend, and I was doing a service to the shoot, and which I love doing, and I love being creative with people, and I love being a part of those projects. It feels like summer camp. It's great. It's just great fun. And I knew what the shoot was, and I knew who I was working with, and I trusted the situation, and I said, okay, you know what? I'll do it. I'll make this happen for you guys. And I showed up, and they went over everything that they needed me to do. Nude underwear, pasties, and and it was it was fine. You know what I mean? It was I was I was okay to do those things, but I was thinking I was going to have a lot of support when I was doing the things that they were asking me to do, and I went to my friend, and I was like, I'm really uncomfortable now, and I don't want to be here, and I kind of changed my mind, and I want to leave, and because of it just wasn't a supportive. It wasn't an environment that people want to be in. It was very hectic, and no one is I was. Anyways, just not getting into it, but I was.
So what happened? Anything?
No, I mean I finished the day.
Yeah.
And and they got everything that they needed. And
so you didn't leave the set. You went through with it. Okay.
Well, what happened was my producer friend that I talked to, and I was like, I want to leave. And he was like, don't leave. It's going to be fine. And he said the first AD was dropping the ball with me or something like that. Gosh, I just felt really taken advantage of, and I felt really used. And I was really angry at my friend, and I was really angry at this girl. And so the first AD took me aside, and I thought she was going to apologize, and I thought she was going to say things were going to work better, and that there was no excuse for how things were going. And but she didn't. She was just like, what you need to understand is that my director is a boss bitch. She needs to get her shot. She needs to get this done, and you need to be here, and you're being here for her. And it's just it was just she chewed me out. For being uncomfortable, and being naked on a shoot. And I was so upset about how all this happened. And I was so angry that this was being boasted as this big feminist short film, and how it was a feminist shoot, and how most of the people working on this shoot were women. And yeah, and I never got an apology from the female director who I supported and who I thought was a friend of mine or somebody I trusted, with my body. Mm-hmm. And then I went to a screening of another friend's thing, and I saw her, and she looked at me, and she just spun on her heels and ran the other direction, So I never got an apology, and even though this woman knew I was very upset by how everything went, and I thought this shouldn't happen. There needs to be people protecting vulnerable women, who don't know any better, and so I read things about Harvey Weinstein, and I read things about Alfred Hitchcock, and I think about that that one experience of being of being on a set and kind of feeling coerced or feeling, oh, they need me and they need these shots, and I told them I'd do it, and it's
Therefore, what?
How do we make it good for everyone? You know what I mean?
Well,
how do we make it?
We don't, is the answer. We don't. Life is very imperfect. This is a business that actually does need to get its shot, and so I'm not taking sides here, but I can certainly see the director's point of view that if you said you were going to do this and she needs to get this shot, then you need to do it or leave.
Yeah.
It's the nature of the film business. People aren't friendly. They aren't nice. They don't say thank you. It's all about what can you do for me in exchange for whatever I can do for you. It's a highly transactional business. And you just know that going in, and I think you're probably getting upset, although not knowing any of the specifics of it, you're probably getting upset with the nature of the business itself rather than any one thing in particular. But let's talk about that, because clearly the whole notion of Hollywood and the kinds of movies that we make has changed over the course of 100 years. But basic stories are always the same. They're about people in strong states of emotion all the time.
Yeah.
That's the whole key to what writing a film script is, that you're doing a 2-hour slice of pretend reality. So there's no time for people to just sit around and have coffee and make small talk in a movie. You don't write those scenes.
Yeah.
All you write are the scenes that move the plot forward, move the story forward, two different things, as we've long discussed. And then you're showing people reacting in some sort of conflict. When I first came to Hollywood, my wonderful producer, the late Dan Melnick, said conflict in every scene. That's the rule. Conflict in every scene. So you got involved in your own doing a scene in conflict. So that's actually good screenwriting, because that's what had just gone smoothly. You wouldn't have had a story. And you might not have learned a life lesson about Hollywood too. But that's how everybody in this business thinks. And so you can't expect a kind of normal workplace environment. It's not an insurance office. And there are no rules. The first rule of the movie business, according to William Goldman, is there are no rules. And nobody knows anything, and there are no rules. So that's what we're all caught up in here. And I think if you don't want to play, nothing bad should happen to you on a shoot, obviously.
Right.
But if you don't want to play, then don't be in the business. Find another line of work. That's what I would say.
I mean, I think my special circumstance was that it was a feminist shoot, and it was advertised as a feminist shoot.
Okay, well, I don't know. I have no truck with feminism anyway. I think it's highly suspect and has become essentially anti-male ravings of lunatics. Not the first wave feminists, obviously.
No. And I was curious, do you consider yourself a first wave feminist?
No, I don't consider myself a feminist at all. I mean, I don't care. If women want to be in the workforce, great. They've always been. As long as I've been in the workforce, starting in 1972, there have been women. I've had women editors as early as 1972. I don't care. If they're any good, great. If they're not great. But am I devoted to getting higher percentages of women, or figure out whatever other minority you want into certain fields? No, I think the field should be competitive and should be based on merit. And I'm not a great believer in conspiracies against whole races and whole sexes. Especially not in contemporary America. Things are better now than they've ever been, and yet people are less happy than they've ever been, because they feel more aggrieved and they feel more upset, and it's making everybody nuts. So people should just take the labels and get rid of them. Try to make good pictures, or try to write good books, or do whatever is in your power to make it as good as you can make it.
Right.
There's no crying in baseball, remember?
Really?
As Tom Hanks says in A League of Their Own. Yeah, you can't cry about work. Work's work. That's why they call it work.
But they did cry when they were playing baseball. That's the thing.
Yeah, well, he had to yell at them because the girls were all getting all weepy.
But it's that's how women are. I cry all the time.
Well, I know
love
women
cry.
are weepy. That's true. But he's trying to say, if you want to play baseball like a man, then you can't cry. What's wrong with that?
But why not play baseball like a woman and cry whenever you want?
Because it's not baseball.
If you're crying, you can play baseball and cry.
There's no crying in baseball.
Who says?
Well, let's get that clip and put it up on YouTube. There's no crying in baseball.
Says Tom Hanks.
Yeah. So
because he's right about everything.
You can't let emotions sway your ability to do your job. We all get angry at work.
Yeah.
But either you do the job or you don't. That's it.
Yes. All right. So critical theory.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
You wrote to a wonderful novel, The Devil's Pleasure Palace.
Well, it's not a novel. It's a nonfiction book.
Nonfiction novel. But I call them novels.
It's not a novel.
I prefer novel to book.
Yeah, but novels are fiction.
Novels?
By definition, yeah.
What
Anyway.
about a nonfiction novel?
A nonfiction novel. I came close to doing that in my book, And All the Saints, which was a fake autobiography of a famous gangster, and I wrote it in his voice. So that was almost a nonfiction novel. Most of it was true. It's just that I made up everything.
Really?
Yes, but I had to make up his voice and how he talked and all the things that happened to him, other than the stuff that's in the historical record. But Devil's Pleasure Palace is a study of the Frankfurt School, which was a group of German philosophers that came to the United States after World War II, and their effect on the educational system and the culture of the United States. So when I was in college, one of them was still alive and was very influential. His name was Herbert Marcuse. He was teaching. They all started at Columbia University, but Marcuse wound up here in Southern California teaching San Diego. And they had a tremendous effect on the culture. So we're dealing with the fallout from that now.
So what is critical theory?
Well, critical theory is very simple. It's now an academic discipline, but what it says is that there's nothing that can't be criticized and deconstructed and destroyed. So critical theory is a bogus intellectual and academic tool to go after the basic things about the culture and try to change them and affect them. And they've attacked America on grounds of history, on race, on sex, on class, on culture. And much of the social push to the left has come from critical theory, which is, just take something simple like marriage between a man and a woman. Why shouldn't we attack that? Well, because it's been that way for 5,000 years. How about let's start with that? Yeah, but we don't care. So they moved the ball very fast and got gay marriage in. That's not to take one point of view or another about gay marriage. It just shows you how fast they can make social change. So we've moved on to a lot of other things that would not have been on the list to attack sequentially. But now once you start rolling, there's nothing that you can't attack and change. That's critical theory. I disagree with it. I disagree with cultural Marxism very clearly. And so that book was a kind of a call to arms, a rather successful one, to re-engage people in what are the verities of Western culture. And then the second book, which has just come out recently, is called The Fiery Angel. And The Fiery Angel is the pushback. If you reject critical theory and if you reject the Frankfurt School, how do we fight back against this? How do we fight back against the denorming of our culture? And my attitude and my crusade now that I'm on is to use the tools of Western art to find out where our moral center is supposed to be. That is not the tools of Marx culturally applied, but the tools of Milton and Goethe and Shakespeare and Beethoven and the Roman historians and playwrights, the Greek playwrights. All of these people have, in the works of art that they've created, have expressed some sort of social morality that may be a subtext and it may be more obvious, but it has created the cultural consensus of Western civilization. And it's now under attack. It started going under attack in the universities in the 70s, because that's where critical theory started. And now to defend European American culture, you're practically called a racist. Well, you are called a racist by some of these people. So they've become deracinated, as I like to say, and fueled by emotion, very angry, very violent people. And we are dealing with this right now. All the craziness going on in America right now is really rooted in the breakdown of the social order under the battering of the Frankfurt School and critical theory.
What are some of them? So, I mean, with gay marriages and stuff, I mean, I think social change, I mean, there's always going to be negatives to any social change, even if it's overall positive. And I always support families, and I think marriage should be about families. And I know a friend from school, and he and I work on some sets together, and he's in Michigan, and he gets married, and they adopted a little boy from Africa and stuff, and they have like a happy little family unit.
Okay, I'm not debating the relative worth of any of this.
Oh, yeah,
I'm just showing how the process works.
But still, I mean, it's like it's a social change, but there's a family from that social change. And there's a little boy, who was from an orphanage, who's,
here's what I
here
would like
because
to
he's had that
interject,
social
because
change.
what you're saying here, you're taking a very female approach, which is to emotionalize it and particularize it. And when I was a professor, I used to say to my students, if you watch it's a leftist trick to elevate the singular to the universal, that is to take one specific case and say, look at this happy family, look at this woman, look at this, they did X and everything's fine with them. Well, that's fine with them, but it's not necessarily intellectually fine applied across the board. So that's why we have these arguments. But the way the left pushes its argument is emotionally. So Bill Clinton used to do this all the time. He signed some abortion law, I remember, during the Clinton administration. And he had a bunch of women who had had an abortion around him, because Bill always liked to be surrounded by girls. And he was a coward, so he'd be protected by these women. And he would say, are you going to look at this woman here and say, you shouldn't have done that? You personally, you evil American racist Nazi, whatever's going to tell this woman she shouldn't have done that thing? And that's how they get away with it. Whereas public policy should not be decided on individual instances. There's a saying in the law, hard cases make bad law.
Sure.
And you have to think about what is the greatest good for the greatest number in a Republican democracy, which is what we live in. We don't live in a real democracy.
Yeah.
We live in a representative republic democracy. So emotionalism should not be the key factor in any political decisions we make.
That's true, but I mean, I don't know. It's like, if you can't beat them, join them. And I don't understand, why don't conservatives just join them? Just do the same thing.
Well, conservatives should, but they don't. They don't, because they just never occurs to them. And David Horowitz...
if, for example, like the whole thing with the Ben Shapiro thing with like standing on the graves of dead kids, so it's like, okay, so there's these dead children, and there are these children that were, involved in, a school shooting and had to witness that. And so why not just have all these kids that were saved by self-defense, by their mothers or fathers protecting them with a gun? I know my mom didn't want to own a gun, when she was, when we, were living with her, and that was, she was our only, person. She's not like a gun owner. She's not, a violent person, but she needed a gun. She had 2 daughters. She didn't live in a great neighborhood. Okay. And so it's like, so you have the graves of dead kids, but then you have these 2 little girls that, if anything, God forbid, somebody were to break in, they had a mother that could protect them. So it's like, we have to, I feel like that's kind of like what this podcast is. It's just like, okay, so graves of dead kids, with kids that promoted, that, are anti-gun because they witnessed a school shooting. And then there are kids that, have been protected by guns.
Right.
So, there's always stories. There's always, and it's all anecdotal.
But anecdotes can't be the basis for law. They can't.
Sure. But at the same time, like, all of our perspectives and how we become who we are is because of our own personal anecdotal experiences.
Well, that's true. Our own individual experiences, and whether those anecdotes are widely shared or completely unique is hard to tell.
But still, it's like, how can someone like me, how can I not support gay relationships and gay marriages?
Well, like I said, I don't want to get into arguing specifics here. We're talking in terms of principles now. So one of the things I always say is principles, not programs. That conservatives, Republicans, whatever you want to call them, should be not debating with Democrats or liberals over specific policy programs, because then you're already on their turf. You've accepted the fact that this program should even exist. When you should be arguing, do we need this program? Do we need duplicative programs? Do we need 17 different versions of child welfare?
Yeah.
We have a tremendously complex society with 330 million people, and arguing anecdotes just isn't going to get us anywhere.
Yeah. So how do we change the debate, and how do we put aside anecdotes? Because it's just, we're all coming from an experience, and how do we just like ignore those experiences and just, look to the greater good?
Well, you don't want to atomize society. So if everyone is going to operate on the basis of his or her own personal experiences, we have 330 different people moving in different directions.
Sure.
So at some point, you have to accept that you're going to lose one of these arguments. It may not be based on racism, sexism, blah, 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 the usual litany of sins. It just may be, this doesn't work for us as a society. And this is why I've come back to write these two books, which is say, what does work for a society?
Yeah.
Well, you can analyze it politically, but that's boring. Why not analyze it artistically? Because the artists certainly show,
Yeah.
excuse me, show how life was lived. We go back to the Oresteia by Aeschylus, for example, something I spent a lot of time on in Fiery Angel. And what is it about? It's about Agamemnon returning from the Trojan War, victorious, after 10 years. 10 years he's been away. And what happens to him, he brings Cassandra, the famous prophetess, back with him as his mistress. So they get off the boat, and his wife, Clytemnestra, is waiting for him with an axe. Because
Wait a second. This is
the
Iliad?
No, this is the Oresteia.
Oh, sorry.
Yeah. It's
When you said Cassandra.
Yeah, the Iliad. It's about the Trojan War, but it's after the Trojan War. The Iliad ends.
Cassandra commits suicide.
What's that?
Does Cassandra commit suicide in the Iliad?
No, she goes back anyway. In the Oresteia, she goes back with Agamemnon as his mistress.
Oh.
And Agamemnon is murdered in his bathtub by his wife Clytemnestra,
Okay.
who throws a net over him and then chops him up because
Good
she
for her.
has a lover named Aegisthus, and she's very angry. This is the crucial thing. Agamemnon sacrificed their daughter,
Yes.
Iphigenia,
Yes.
because the winds were not favorable, and the Greeks need to get their whole fleet across the sea to Troy, which is in what's now Turkey.
Gosh.
So she kills him,
yes, good
and
for her.
when Orestes comes home, finally, the son, he kills her and Aegisthus. And so he goes on trial for matricide, which is a terrible crime. You killed your own mother.
Matricide?
Matricide, yeah.
Ah.
He goes on trial for matricide, and he is eventually, they convene a jury. This is over the course of all three plays, of 12 people. So where does the jury of 12 come from? It comes all the way back from the ancient Greeks, and that's a long time ago, 2,500 years ago. And they are basically hung until Apollo and Athena rule in Orestes' favor and say that even though he committed a great crime, his mother committed a greater crime by killing her husband and depriving him of his father. So these are very thorny legal issues and moral issues that the playwright deals with in a way that's far more interesting and humanizing
Yes.
than if we were to just read abstract political treatises from ancient Greece. We don't. Well, there aren't any, for very, very few, for one thing. But it's much better to have them personified by these timeless literary characters. And we have so much to learn from our own culture, but we've forgotten it because it's been not taught to your generation particularly.
Yeah.
Your generation is almost wholly ignorant of classical and literary history. And you're much the poorer for it because you get upset about things and you want advice, and you're not going to get them from counselors or shrinks. What you are going to get is advice from great authors and great composers and great artists who will speak to you in a way that is not you paying somebody to sit on a couch and boo-hoo. Mm-hmm. So as you know, I have almost zero tolerance for psychiatrists and psychologists because I think they're basically fraudulent, and I think they extract people's money and take advantage of their pain and have zero incentive to cure them of whatever imaginary mental problems they might have. I'm very hard on this one. And I think much better that you go back and read the Aeneid and learn about heroism and tragic love, the Dido and Aeneas section from the Aeneid. That'll teach you more about male-female relationships than any feminist book from the 60s or 70s. You may not like the answer, but that's something that's stood the test of time.
Yeah.
Yeah, anyway, read the Aeneid. It's wonderful.
The Aeneid?
Yeah, read chapter 4 of the Aeneid.
Chapter 4?
Yep, that's the Dido section.
Okay.
Yep, one of the great love stories ever.
Okay.
Tragic. Doesn't end well,
Good.
especially for Dido. Yeah.
Okay, so Alfred Hitchcock.
All right, so let's talk about Alfred Hitchcock. Yeah.
All right. So Alfred Hitchcock had some very controversial. He had a very controversial directing style, where
Well, controversial to who?
to I think society.
Well, nobody ever complained about it during his lifetime. He was a great director. All right.
I don't know if that's true.
All right. Well, go ahead.
Okay.
Prove me wrong.
So this is a quote from Joan Fontaine.
Who was the star of
Rebecca.
Rebecca. Okay.
So this was her second film. She was, I think, 21 years old. They passed over Vivien Leigh. That was very despised decision by the producer, David O. Selznick, and this was his first movie with Alfred Hitchcock.
Well, Selznick had used Vivien Leigh and Gone with the Wind, obviously, and she was a big star.
So Vivien Leigh was supposed to be the star of Rebecca, and then Alfred Hitchcock
nixed that
in favor of Joan Fontaine.
And this is Hitchcock's first American movie,
Yeah.
so he wants to be as good as he can be.
Right.
Right?
But if he wants to be as good as he can be, why would he pass over Vivien Leigh?
He thought Joan Fontaine was better for the part.
Actually, from the book and how it was described, I don't think that was the case.
Okay, what was the case?
She was, they complained that she wasn't as beautiful as Vivien Leigh.
Yeah.
Laurence Olivier had wanted to work with Vivien Leigh, and he really was, I think, expecting to work with Vivien Leigh, and then was disappointed with having to work with Joan Fontaine.
Okay, that's typical casting changes in Hollywood. It's very normal.
But Alfred Hitchcock's choice to cast Vivien Leigh was based on she wasn't beautiful enough, she wasn't talented enough, and she wasn't famous enough. And
you mean Joan Fontaine?
Joan Fontaine.
Okay.
And I know that that mirrors Harvey Weinstein, because Harvey Weinstein would often cast, extras, models, or women who weren't talented, women who weren't experienced, and just put them in roles, put them in like one lines, with like a line or something like that, and then be very clear with them. You're here because of me.
Yes. So what? So what?
Well, shouldn't those
You think the producers never cast his girlfriend or his mistress in a movie?
Well, the tactic.
You seem to keep coming back to this. This is no, that's Marxist power. Yes, the director has a lot of power. You get a movie made, you watch that how the director is the boss on the set. He's the boss, and if he wants this person in it, not that person, he's going to get it. It's just the way the system works. If you don't like the system, go home.
Okay.
But go ahead. So what's the issue here?
This is the quote from Joan Fontaine.
Okay.
He seemed to want total possession of me, she remembered. He wasn't convivial, and he didn't arrange for us to have lunch together or sit down for a chat. He was a Svengali. You know what that is?
Yeah, of course.
What is it?
Svengali is a famous character in a work by Du Maurier, I believe, called Trilby. And Svengali takes young Trilby. It's My Fair Lady, basically. He takes the woman and molds her to what he wants her to be. It's the Phantom of the Opera with the Phantom and Christine Daae. It's a very typical story. We've seen it done in multiple ways throughout artistic history. Yeah, so a Svengali has a slightly sinister connotation now.
Yeah.
But it's just a guy who takes a young woman and turns her into it's a Star is Born, for God's sake.
Oh.
It's the same story. Go ahead.
Okay. He was a Svengali. He controlled me totally. He took me aside and whispered, "Now, kid, you go in there and you do this and you do that." And I would do it. And then he would say, "Do you know what so-and-so said about you today? Do you know that Olivier doesn't want you here in this role? Well, never you mind. You just listen to me and I'll help you."
Okay.
Now, some of what he told me might not have been true.
Yeah. How about that?
That's very acute. But of course, it also made me feel absolutely miserable all the time because she was being abused.
Yeah.
To be honest, he was divisive with us. He wanted total control over me, and he seemed to relish the cast not liking one another, actor for actor, by the end of the film. Now, of course, this helped my performance, since I was supposed to be terrified of everyone. Since I was supposed to be terrified of everyone, because this was Rebecca.
Right.
And it gave me a lot of tension to my scenes. It kept him in command, and it was part of the upheaval he wanted. He kept me off balance, much to his own delight. He would constantly tell me that no one thought I was any good except himself, and that nobody really liked me, and nobody would say anything good about me except himself.
Okay, so what? What's Hitchcock's job?
He's a director.
To make the best movie he can make.
Yeah.
To get the best performances out of the actors that he can.
Yeah.
You think directors don't manipulate actors? Sometimes they slap them on the set to make them react properly or to get them angry. That is frowned on now, but it certainly was fairly common in the old days. It would be just like Hitchcock to take, and especially all of his movies feature a woman. All of his movies, this one with Laurence Olivier himself, one of the greatest actors even then at the time, is about Rebecca, clearly. So Hitchcock's job was to, by any means necessary, get the performance he wanted out of Joan Fontaine. And if he tells her the other cast doesn't like you, he may be lying to her. We don't know. But you don't expect people to all get along in a workplace. There's a wonderful scene in Chicago, where the two women who are the merry murderesses of the Cook County Jail, when they get out, the character played by what's her name now? Catherine Zeta-Jones turns to who is it in that played the girl in?
It was Catherine Zeta-Jones and Renee Zellweger.
Right, Renee Zellweger. Turns to Renee Zellweger. Renee Zellweger basically says, "Yeah, but we hate each other," and Catherine Zeta-Jones says, "I can think of one profession where that is absolutely not a problem," and then they become this song and dance act together. So yes, they may hate each other. Throughout history, there have been very important partnerships that the people didn't like each other particularly.
Yeah.
On the other hand, there was a famous string quartet, the Quartetto Italiano. There was one woman in it and three guys, and she married all three of them, seriatim, one after another. So she had a physical and emotional relationship with all the other members of the quartet. That's the other extreme, where you're literally everyone is very close. How the other men felt about being her ex-husbands, I don't know. But this is not really, I don't understand that this is an indictment of Hitchcock. Hitchcock's just trying to make a movie.
Sure. But I wonder, Laurence Olivier he had that famous quote where he chewed out Dustin Hoffman and said, "It's acting."
Yeah, try acting.
Yeah, try acting.
Yeah.
And so Laurence Olivier, I think what his disappointment was is that he signed on to do Rebecca thinking he was going to be opposite
He doesn't
Vivian
care.
Leigh.
If he gets paid, he doesn't care. He might have signed on, but the casting changed. He could have signed off. Now it's the studio system, so that's in part the actors were not in control of their own destinies, and they had to do what they had to do.
But I just wonder where that quote was coming from and where that frustration towards Dustin Hoffman was
I don't think she's
coming
frustrated
from.
at all. In fact,
If
I don't
it
even
came
hear that as a
from
criticism.
his experience working with Alfred Hitchcock
You
on
mean
that movie.
Olivier?
Yeah, because Joan Fontaine wasn't really a trained actress. She didn't have experience.
So?
And she wasn't that beautiful. So Vivian Leigh was this world-renowned Academy Award winner who was like the toast of the West End in London, and she was this brilliant actress.
Yeah.
And so...
But maybe it was a budgetary consideration. Maybe Vivian Leigh was too expensive for Selznick in the studio. There's a lot of reasons why casting choices get made, as you know, and it's not always a sinister plot. So I think Fontaine is great in Rebecca, and the movie's great. And she certainly holds her own with Olivier, who could be not only a great actor, but a great ham actor. If he wanted to start chewing on the scenery, he would definitely do it. I recommend people go watch The Betsy if they want to see Sir Larry with his pants down, literally. But it's not a criticism of Hitchcock, and it's not anti-feminine. He might do the same thing to a male star too. He just happened to be a woman's director. Every movie of his has someone like Kim Novak or Tippi Hedren or Grace Kelly. I mean, you think of all the great Hitchcock heroines. They after Rebecca, they start to be the ice blonde, right? That were sexually perfect, so much so that they were practically unattainable. That they practically weren't even real women. When Grace Kelly shows up with catered dinner from 21 in Rear Window, I mean, she looks so perfect that he's just not even going to touch her. You don't want to muss a single strand of hair on her head. Tippi Hedren in The Birds is very tightly wrapped, as you remember. But then she meets Rod, what was the actor's name in The Birds? Rod, huh? No. It's enough. See if you can look him up there. Rod Taylor. Okay, so she meets Rod Taylor in a pet shop, and then she's intrigued by Rod Taylor, and she basically follows him up to Bodega Bay, where she's attacked by the birds. And so The Birds is a very complex and fascinating movie, much better than I thought it was when I was younger.
Sure.
But again, you have this woman that she literally gets her hair mussed. So by the end of that movie, she's been pecked at by the birds, and they're straggling away. And Suzanne Plachette's been killed by the birds. I mean, it's a very challenging picture. But let's talk about Vertigo, for example,
Vertigo,
because I know you want to. And that's an extremely complicated sexual undercurrent.
In no other film did Hitchcock have so clear a masculine alter ego than James Stewart in this film.
Mm-hmm.
The probing questions of a man who wants not only to solve a mystery and to save a woman, but also to exert the control that comes from complete knowledge had their counterpart in the practiced private conferences Hitchcock held with the actresses he most favored: Madeleine Carroll, Joan Fontaine, Ingrid Bergman, Grace Kelly, and Vera Miles.
Mm-hmm.
And 5 years later, the tendency would reach its saddest and most destructive expression, an obsession from which he would never recover. He is suffering, says Encalia, together with the guilt complex. The diagnosis was articulated by Hitchcock himself. So,
well, you don't expect
from
Hitchcock
acute
to be normal.
melancholia,
yeah.
together with a guilt complex.
Okay.
So that line in the movie was written by Alfred Hitchcock, giving himself his own diagnosis.
Okay.
The diagnosis was articulated by Hitchcock himself and was indeed self-diagnosis, locating the pain he felt in each decade of his career and describing his own and most recent reaction to the disappointment he felt over Vera Miles.
But Vera Miles isn't in Vertigo.
No.
Yeah, she was in Psycho.
Yes, and she was in the movie before Psycho. And there was something... What happened with Vera Miles? What was the situation there?
I don't know. Why he fell out with Vera Miles?
Yeah.
I don't know. She plays Janet Leigh's sister in Psycho. So she's in most of the movie because, Janet Leigh gets killed off on the first third of the picture.
Mm. But along with what Hitchcock might have thought were his strongest romantic impulses, there was a hesitancy caused by contrary urges. The belief that any beautiful woman was a deception, a cheat, and a dangerous seduction of spirit and body caused a simultaneous attraction and repulsion in him that created his own spiritual vertigo.
That's a very common view of women throughout artistic history. Irresistible, beautiful, duplicitous, and untrustworthy. That's not an anti-female statement. That is a widely shared observation, starting with the Greeks and continuing through contemporary Arab culture. And the Arabs view women as temptation and trouble. So what? So let's just talk a little bit about Vertigo. What's it about? It's about a guy who is a San Francisco cop.
Yes.
Who has vertigo. He does fear of heights.
Right.
And as the movie opens, he's doing a rooftop chase, and with another cop of a bad guy.
Yeah.
And the bad guy leaps from one building to the next, and so the cop tries to leap and falls to his death, and Jimmy Stewart tries to leap and winds up not quite making it, hanging on by his fingernails and looking down, and bad things happen to him. So he has to retire, and he's at home. He's in his office in his new line of work as a PI, and there's several important things that happen in that first act. One is the girl who works for him is clearly in love with him.
Yes.
She is over the moon about him, but he has zero interest in her, none.
Which is Alfred Hitchcock's relationship to his wife. She was more of a colleague.
That's possible. That's possible. And then a man comes and he says, I think my wife is having an affair. Follow her around.
Yeah.
Okay, so the classic sort of detective opening. And I think she might be trying to hurt herself. I think that's actually...
No, he said that they had a happy marriage and that...
But he has to go out of town.
Yeah.
And he wants Scotty
he was worried about her.
To tailor. So what happens is he follows Kim Novak, and he follows her to right under the Golden Gate Bridge, and she jumps into the water. And he has to make a decision to save her or not. So he does. And he falls in love with her. And then she apparently dies later in a fall from a bell tower down at a mission. And so he's disconsolate because he's totally fallen in love with this mysterious woman. And then one day he sees a girl that looks very much like her, but not glamorous, but sort of dowdy, and a shop girl down on Geary Street. And he realizes it's either the woman he thinks is dead, so he decides he's going to take this girl and turn her back into the dead girl. Mm-hmm. So he's obsessive about it. Jimmy Stewart in this movie is insane. He's crazy. And he buys her clothes. He gets her hair fixed. He demands that she dress like the late, what's her name? Mm-hmm. And in the most extraordinary scene, he's talking to her, and she doesn't want to do it. And he says, "It can't matter to you. It can't matter to you. It matters to me, but it can't matter to you. What difference does it make if I turn you into someone, this dead woman?" And so she goes along with it because she's kind of in love with him too. And then she turns herself back into the girl that we saw fall from the bell tower. And what happens at the end of the movie? She falls from the bell tower. and then she dies for real. So it ends horribly tragically. But it's about sexual obsession and what people do to alleviate that terrible desire that they have for somebody. And that's this movie it's French. It was based on a French book. Oh. It's Hitchcock's most challenging picture. It wasn't that big of a success when it came out because it wasn't a horror movie, it wasn't a thriller, it wasn't any of this. But I think right now it's his greatest picture, and most everybody sees it that way because it's so complex.
It is.
Is Scotty a nice guy? No, he's not a nice guy. He's not a nice guy. And is the girl kind of weak-willed and allows herself to be manipulated? Yes, of course she does. And when she falls to her death, it's only because she's been frightened by this nun that shows up. Hitchcock's a Catholic, and he had this thing about scary nuns. So the movie is a record of his neuroses, for sure.
Exactly.
But it's a great work of art. So which do you want? A non-neurotic artist or no work of art?
Well, that's my issue, is just how do we get movies like Vertigo without...
What? Without hurting somebody's feelings?
Yeah.
You don't. You can't. It's simple. No, this is a point I make over and over again. If you try to straighten out an artist whose lives do not conform to what you might refer to as bourgeois convention, they don't, and they never will. But if you take an artist and get him into, say, therapy so that he's now less obsessive about, I don't know, he might be in love with snails or something, and all he wants to do is make movies about snails. If you cure him, then you have no artist. You just have another normal person. And we have to allow the small percentage of artists to be whoever they want to be. Even though we don't like it, they're not very appealing, they're hard to work with, they're difficult, they may be, real pricks, but you don't want to give up the art just to cure the guy or girl. Let's talk about creative safe spaces, because I know you want to talk
safe
about
spaces.
that. Okay.
So how do we create creative safe spaces?
We don't.
Okay.
There are no safe spaces. Safe spaces are for crybaby millennials like you.
Oh, sorry.
No, I'm kidding. Safe spaces, there are no safe spaces. Because you were raised, and your generation has been raised in a essentially safe environment. 9/11 was a formative experience for you because you were a little kid, obviously. But other than that, there hasn't been a big threat to the United States. There's school shootings now sometimes get younger people agitated, although your chances of getting shot in a school shooting are negligible, essentially. You can win the Powerball lottery before you get shot in a school shooting in a big country. So this desire for safe spaces isn't safe spaces. It's a desire not to have your own opinion controverted by somebody else. What the juveniles want in colleges is not to be contradicted. What I object to the left, and always have, is that not only will they not tolerate an opposing point of view or argue it, they don't want you to be allowed to hold it. That is to say, you must submit to their way of viewing any particular case. So when we say no, they demand that we submit to them. And that's just crazy. So I think college students and young people in their 20s ought to be, life's going to beat you up. It just is.
Yeah.
And there's no way to hide it. Someone you love is going to die. Something terrible is going to happen to you. Or not. You don't know. You just don't know. And there's no way your parents can protect you from it. And there's no way you can protect yourself from some of the vagaries of life. Therefore, it would be better for everyone not to wish for safe spaces. And college used to be a place where you'd confront opposite ideas. You were exposed to opposite ideas. Now they want not to be exposed to anything that interferes with their insane worldview, which is impractical and impossible. So that's the problem with safe spaces. There aren't any. And you'll be very unhappy looking for them because you'll never find one. Not really.
Okay.
Why is safe space important? I don't understand it. I wouldn't want one even if there was. So why is it important?
Well, for me, I really regret not leaving that set. And I really regret...
Okay, so why didn't you leave that set?
I don't know. I didn't want to disappoint...
You could have said, I don't want to do this. I'm out of here.
I don't know. I mean, it's like, why didn't...
They'd hate you just as much as they do now.
I mean, it's like, if I were drafted to go to Vietnam, I wouldn't go to Canada. You know what I mean? It's like you kind of have to do what you have to do.
Yeah, but so
otherwise
why
people are going to judge you.
Okay.
And
well, so what if they judge you? Everybody gets judged constantly, right?
Right.
Judgmentalism is part. I know, but your generation hates the word judgmental. Hates it, and doesn't want to be judged. But everyone's going to judge you, from God on down.
Sure.
To the shoe shine guy.
Yeah.
So that's not something that you should even think about.
So you think that artistic environments are completely unique to other ones? Like, it's just creative environments have to be of the Wild West. And it has to be...
Yeah. Yeah, you can't regulate it.
Yeah.
You know, in a movie shoot or any situation in which a group of people, some of whom know each other, some of whom don't, are thrown together for a period, a defined period of intense relationships that they are mimicking in their screen work, then intense relationships will develop among them.
Sure.
That may end the day that shoot ends. You know, that's what you used to call a shipboard romance, right? Mm-hmm. People would meet on a ship. They had 2 weeks across the Atlantic. Love affairs bloomed and usually ended by the time they got to England. Mm-hmm. So the same is true of anything. And even in a 9-to-5 office, these things happen. A lot of women have met their husbands in a 9-to-5 office. It's just, and if you start regulating everyone's behavior down to the last jot and tittle, then you're going to have a room full of people who don't trust each other, and then you don't have a good work environment. You may think you do, but you don't. And as I said before, the only logical outcome of that is to segregate the sexes again. Women can be in the typing pool and men can be in the executive offices, or vice versa, but you're not going to have any possible reason for someone to have their livelihood destroyed because of an allegation. That's where this goes if it doesn't stop. Well, let's talk about women. Women are their own worst enemies many times. Men are very highly competitive, but men sort themselves out very quickly. Who's the alpha male? Who's the beta male? Who's the boss? Who's the leader? Who's not? It just naturally happens among males. Either it's the biggest, if it's a physical thing, it's going to be the biggest, strongest, fastest guy. He's going to lead this, or the bravest guy, or the smartest guy. If it's a different set of tasks, or the most ruthless and amoral guy. If that's it. And men have a way of sorting out their literally physical differences by punching each other on the most basic basis of who's going to be in charge here. Women don't do that. Women don't punch each other by and large. They tend to be very jealous and territorial about some of their gains, and I've worked with some.
Well, this is where we see eye to eye. I've definitely worked with women who are,
with the risk of offending everybody watching this or listening to it, women tend to, when they achieve power, they make sure no other woman gets close to them.
I think that can be very true.
Well, I think it's definitely true, and I've seen it happen.
And I've experienced it.
I've been in the workplace since 1972. I've seen it happen over and over and over and over and over. And over and over.
But it is anecdotal.
Well, but I think a lot of people have experienced it.
Oh, for sure. I mean...
And I think it's intrinsic in the nature of the sexual distinction. Women don't solve their problems physically. They solve them in ways that, for a man, would not be honorable. Backbiting, backstabbing. No one likes the guy who's the tattletale and the fink and the rat and all of that stuff. But women tend to be. I wish Camille Paglia were here because of Paula. She'd tell you in a minute. So that's just a different way of organizing yourselves as a society. And as I mentioned, in the harem, you have
Yeah.
the one male and you have all of the fertile females.
Yeah.
As you do in a pride of lions. You have one lion and you have a bunch of lionesses.
Sure.
And it only takes one guy to repopulate the planet, but one woman can't do it on her own, obviously.
Sure. But I mean, as far as human nature goes, I mean, men and women are different. I really believe that. And I think that women deal with conflict, in different ways, unhealthy, like they express unhealthy conflict problem solving. Men punch each other, women, have their own way of doing things,
Yeah.
But I always, I think with things like critical theory, I mean, maybe critical theory is something that people can, I mean, where maybe it works and maybe it could be a positive is to look at our own nature, it's just like, I'm having an impulse to hurt another woman, why is, maybe I should criticize this impulse and theorize as to why this is.
Well, I don't think you need to think about what's the right thing to do insofar as the other woman is concerned. If you think that way, then you're not really part of the workplace team. You there's the girl side and
the thing is, I mean,
boys'
I struggle with jealousy, and or
sure.
like, oh, look at that girl and what she has, and I don't have that, and
Yeah.
I hate that girl now, because she has something that I don't have.
Yeah.
And I deal with that all the time. It's an impulse. It's a feeling. You know what I mean? It's what happens sometimes. And
Well-
I'm not a bad person for it, but I don't think it's right, and I don't think it's something I should act on. And and I think that there are healthy and happy and wonderful ways women can practice a new way of thinking about things and a new way of going about things.
Maybe, but remember, we're very new into this. For
Right.
the zillion years of civilization,
Well,
women haven't been in the
Sure,
workplace.
but it's like men use their words now. You know what I mean? Men don't punch each other when they have conflict all the time.
Not
It's not
generally,
like,
no.
but
No.
so
But I'm just saying it's a different, on the animal level, they organize themselves in different ways. And we haven't had women in the workplace until really this 1970s, where a lot of women went into the workforce. You could argue it's damaged society terribly by having this many women in the workforce and not having children. Birth rates have plummeted. Abortion doesn't help, all this stuff. There's lots of downside to having women in the workforce. That said, it's not going to change particularly unless it does.
Well, there's lots of downsides of having men in the workforce too. So, I mean,
Name one. You don't want any Alfred Hitchcock movies?
well, I don't want Alfred Hitchcock. I want his movies.
Well, okay, you don't work with Alfred Hitchcock.
But still, I mean, I'm saying like the women in the workforce, I mean, there's negatives to them being in the workforce, sure, but there's negatives to somebody like Alfred Hitchcock being in the workforce, and that he's going to like control and abuse his actresses.
Yeah, but he didn't abuse them. He didn't abuse them. That's the point.
He threw a live bird at a woman's face, Michael.
Okay,
I'm sorry.
so
like
what?
I just can't. Okay. So okay.
Yeah.
All right.
I mean,
All right.
so what?
Okay.
You do what it takes to get the reaction you need. Otherwise, you're not being true to your profession. You may not
But
like
if your profession is making snuff films, then
Not-
then I
Hitchcock doesn't make snuff films, although he kills Janet Leigh in the shower in that famous scene.
I think that if you're doing something putting somebody in serious danger, then it's a snuff film. If you're throwing a bird at a woman's face where she's going to get hurt,
I don't know. Does the birds? I've never had a bird fly at me, so I don't know.
I've had I like one of my aunt's chickens like you know at me, and that was horrifying. But luckily
Okay,
it
but
didn't
it's
touch
just
my
a
face.
chicken, for God's sake.
Oh God, I remember when I was working at that daycare. We went on this little field trip and to this chicken coop, and there's this like, oh my God, there's a little boy. He's like, like Maggie from like The Simpsons. He was like this totally, it was like that, so cute. But he was like waddling around like a little star, and it was so cute. And then I was like watching him, and then all of a sudden like this chicken just jumped on him and just started like, and then it was just like he was totally helpless, and this chicken was just like started. God, it was just like, and so I kicked it, and then it went away, and like this poor boy like got like he had like little pecks on his cheeks, and it wasn't that bad. He wasn't bleeding, and it was really but it was
It's just a chicken.
still I just can't imagine somebody doing that on purpose to someone. You know what I mean? I can't imagine a man doing that to a woman on purpose.
Well, then you're in the wrong business if you can't imagine it. I mean, I hate to tell you, but it's gonna happen, and it's not abuse. It's not. This word abuse is so overused. Abusive behavior is actually has a very specific meaning, and again, we're talking about Hollywood. You're not going to throw a chicken at somebody's face in an insurance office.
I love this can of worms.
And, but I mean, the chances of that happening.
We're going to talk about birds flying in our faces. It's horrifying. It's a nightmare. But
every stuntman risks his life on a movie set, and some get killed, as you know.
That's true. Well, I mean, somebody gave his life for that the Scorpion King, which I thought was always really...
Well, Vic Morrow got killed making the Twilight Zone movie. And so did two of those Vietnamese kids or whoever were in that shot.
Oh, that's unfortunate.
And people die, and it's certainly... No one intends it to happen.
Yeah.
But I think what you're saying is you want to be protected from all eventuality that makes you uncomfortable. But in that case, become a nun. Go live in a nunnery.
Ugh, that'd be life.
Yeah.
Maybe I should do that. Let me do a podcast.
From the nunnery?
Yeah.
Yeah, well, that would be interesting.
Feminism. First wave, second wave, third wave.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, if you would.
Okay, so first wave feminism came out in around the late 50s.
This is Betty Friedan and Germaine Greer and that crew. Okay.
Yeah, and my favorite. What's her? Gloria Steinem.
Gloria Steinem.
This was my one of my first experiences.
Former Playboy bunny.
I know. Mm-hmm. She was brilliant. And I remember this was one of my first like weird experience with like a feminist being a total like bitch to me. And it was so funny. Mm-hmm. And I was like, she had a picture of Gloria Steinem like taped to her like notebook or something. Mm-hmm. And then I looked at it and I was like, oh, who's that? And by the way, we were at a training for a rape advocacy and training and stuff, and so I was sitting next to her and I asked her who that woman was, and it was a picture of Gloria Steinem, and she was like, "You don't know who Gloria Steinem is?" Mm-hmm. I was just like, no, like, why don't you enlighten me? It was like
Gloria Steinem's old enough to be your great grandmother. Why would you know her?
Well, she was. That's a good point. I think I was like 19 at the time too. Yeah, you know what I mean? It was just like.
Okay, so that's first wave feminism,
right?
What's second wave feminism? Is that Paglia and Madonna?
Well,
Camille got all excited about Madonna when Madonna came up, and
really?
she worshipped Madonna.
So Camille Paglia is the author of The Feminist Mystique.
No, Camille Paglia is the author of Sexual Personae.
Never mind.
Yeah.
And. Who was the author of The Feminist to Speak? That was
Betty Friedan.
Oh, never mind. Okay.
Yeah. But Paglia celebrated Madonna's sort of sexuality and transgressiveness and all the things that made Madonna a pop culture phenomenon in the mid-'80s.
Which is actually like very tame now.
Well, that's the point, is that every if you keep pushing the movement, it has to get more and more outrageous until eventually it blows itself up. So now you're on third wave feminism, which is blowing itself up. It's hurting women. It's silly. It's intellectually frivolous. It's based on resentment, jealousy. And the thing about feminism that I don't understand why any woman would be attracted to it, essentially posits that the more like a man you are, the more feminine you are. It forces you to become like us.
Well, I feel like for me, feminism, a practice of it was that I needed to hate being feminine. And that being feminine or being girly or having higher pitched voice and things like that started becoming embarrassing.
But that's silly.
And
it's silly. It's self-abnegating. Why would you want to do that?
Well, I mean, I don't. And it's
of course not, because it's anti-natural, and that's the problem. Is that what they were telling you should be true? You knew in your heart was not true, and you had to reconcile that. But it makes you crazy when you can't reconcile that. It's exactly what we were.
Well, my biggest issue with third wave feminism is hatred, and
it's about hate.
I've rejected feminism because of third wave feminism.
Well, what's feminism supposed to mean? What is the practical?
Well, I mean, feminism, as the definition, is just equality. You know, men and women have equal value.
All right, let me read a passage to you about equality, okay?
Alrighty.
Because this is something that I've thought about, and this is from The Fiery Angel.
Okay.
And talking about women's and Christianity, because this chapter is called "The Woman Without a Shadow," and that is the title of a famous opera by Richard Strauss, called "Die Frau ohne Schatten," the woman without a shadow. And the without a shadow refers to her inability to conceive a child. That is the subtext of the opera, that She can't cast a shadow, meaning that she's barren. So this is from, you can pick up with this. This is from my chapter 4, The Woman Without a Shadow, from the Fiery Angel. One of the most significant ways in which Christianity changed the world was in its elevation of women from chattel to equal partners with men. Not equal, in quotes, in the sense demanded today, which is to say proportionally represented in the upper echelons of government, corporate governance, and the professions, but equal in their intrinsic worth as human beings. This may come as a surprise to the militantly anti-Christian feminists, in quotes, of the movement's latter stages, many of them radical lesbians and transgender advocates whose bitterness toward both God and nature is manifest, and who have hijacked the cause of the suffragettes of the turn of the last century and the bra burners of the 60s and turned it into a revenge drama. But it is a fact. Christianity transformed women from chattel and helpless rape victims into human beings, a trick of cultural prestidigitation that Islam has not managed to accomplish in well over a millennium, who may not have had the political rights of men, but who had the human rights of men. Christianity elevated women from generative to venerative, building on the pagan goddess cults of Greece and Rome, whose literature featured countless examples of the feminist ideal, the strong woman. Christianity turned marriage from the transfer of sexualized property into what today we would call a relationship, one of equals, not of master-slave. Christianity insisted upon the legitimacy of children, the proper transfer of wealth, and to a certain extent of status. It may have weakened the empire, the Roman Empire, in Gibbon's insistence, but it immeasurably enriched the culture of Christian Europe that it superseded. Scribble, 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 indeed.
Well, I know that the Bible was something that did empower me because I know that I can't blame men for the shit I do. And
you can't blame anybody.
No, but I think a lot of women do blame men for the wrong things that they do.
Well,
and
that speaks poorly of them.
But the fact that I'm going into the afterlife by myself, and I'm not going into the afterlife with my dad, I'm not going into the afterlife with my brothers, I'm not going into the afterlife with my stepdad, I'm not going into the afterlife with my husband, or any of my boyfriends. I'm going into the afterlife by myself,
right, with
my own bullshit. And I can't point at any of these people and say, well, it was a man. Because I'm responsible for my own soul.
Yes.
And
well, as a Christian, you have to believe that, right?
Yeah. Well, I mean, as a woman, I think you have to believe that. And I feel like a lot of feminists don't think they're responsible for themselves in a way that's that's almost this might be counterintuitive, but if women are blaming men for all their problems, then women are acknowledging that they're not equal.
Well, exactly. I was just about to point that out. They're still subservient to men.
Yeah.
So how is that feminist?
It's not. And it's a lie. And women do need to take responsibility for their actions. And I've just seen too many women just be so miserable and unhappy. And it's because...
We call those cat ladies. Right?
Cats aren't bad. They're fine. But,
never mind. Go ahead. Anyway, cat ladies, yes.
So I do agree with some of what you've said there. And I hope that women of all races and religions or beliefs can empower themselves with empowering themselves that I'm doing shitty things too, just like men are. And I think once that happens, I think women will be a lot happier. I think women will start helping women more. And yeah, but misandry is a killer. Misandry is a destroyer. And the fact that it's being pumped into our society by third wave feminists, when I know it hurts me. Mm-hmm. Hate hurts you. It doesn't matter who it is. It doesn't matter if you're hating white men. It doesn't matter if you're hating any men.
Here's the thing about misandry from feminists. We don't care. It affects me not at all. I couldn't care less what they think. Not a bit. I lose zero sleep over toxic masculinity. It's what's on offer from me. Toxic masculinity. You don't like it? I don't care. Right? So why should we care what they think? Why should you care? You're smart enough not to care. And it does. All it does is reinforce masculine superiority. The person that you hate and are jealous of is someone who has power over you, who doesn't even know it and doesn't care. Obviously, I've said this many times, that jealousy is a completely useless emotion. It only hurts you. The person that you're jealous of doesn't even know you exist or doesn't care. So why should third wave feminists be angry at men? We don't care. Right? And we're not going to change, because you can't. You can't change your essential nature. You can ameliorate it around the edges.
You can act accordingly.
Well, you definitely things have changed, but they may change back too. That's something that the left doesn't understand, is that you may have some social change and then it'll get rolled back. The Soviets thought they were creating the new Soviet man with the Russian Revolution, and starting with Lenin in the 1920s. Well, that empire's gone. It's dead, and it'll not come back. It failed, and all that social change, down the drain. Human nature reasserted itself. I suspect that's what will happen with feminism, too, is eventually we've hit the high water mark of crazy now. So real women will reclaim femaleness and femininity for real women and not paying attention to these screeching harpies and harridans. It's true. Well, we mentioned Aeschylus in the third play in the Oresteia, the Eumenides. Eumenides is a Greek word for the blessed ones, the loving ones. These are harpies. They were then called Erenyes, and the Erenyes were vicious female spirits who screeched and attacked men constantly. And they want Orestes convicted of murder because he killed a woman. So they're quite upset about this. And when the judgment comes down from Pallas Athena and Apollo, the Erenyes are transformed into the Eumenides. They suddenly become loving, kind, glorious spirits, and they hail the verdict and how they're all going to move into the future together. I end the book with this quote from the Eumenides by Aeschylus. So let's just hear that. After the Sturm und Drang of the Oresteia, after all the blood and vengeance and guilt, the trilogy ends on a pre-Christian note of forgiveness, of a world restored with the transformation of the Furies, that was the Erenyes, into the Eumenides, as the women of Athens declaim the final chorus. With loyalty we lead you, proudly go, night's childless children, to your home below. They're talking to the Eumenides now. Pass hitherward, ye powers of dread, with all your former wrath allayed, into the heart of this loved land. Let holy hands libations bear, and the second play in the Oresteia is called the Libation Bearers. Let holy hands libations bear, and torches sacred flames, all-seeing Zeus and fate come down to battle fair for Pallas's town. And I conclude the book with this observation. All the tropes of Western civilization are there, present at its creation in 458 BC. This is a long time ago. The childless children of the night, what music they make. That's a line from Dracula, of course. The bravery in the face of dread and danger, the healing power of justice and forgiveness, and above all, the light of the sacred flame, born by the eternal feminine, to illuminate the conflict between reason and unreason that is man's endless and unwavering lot, to provide for us a beacon, an inspiration, and a goal. That this comes at the very beginning of Western civilization, not its end, ought to tell us something. The battle fair for Pallas's town continues. We have our guides, if only we will heed them. So I think that's what's going to happen, is the transformation of the Furies into the libation bearers, because you can't have a society in which men and women are at each other's throats. It becomes destable, and it dies. If women don't have children, it dies. It's as simple as that. There is still no replacement for replacing people. And if women are going to hate men, if this is going to be Lysistrata, in which the women of Greece withheld sex from their husbands who were off fighting because they wanted the fighting to stop.
And it worked.
It kind of worked, yeah.
Well, it ended the war.
It sort of, yeah.
Yes.
But it's a little more complicated than that. But if that's the model, then you have no Greece. Then Greece dies. If American women stop having children, America as founded dies. It becomes a different place with different people. Greece now, today, the Greeks today have no biological connection to the Greeks of ancient Greece. They're essentially a different people. But they kept the language. It's modern Greek rather than ancient Greek. They kept a lot of the trappings of the civilization. But Greece peaked and it was replaced by Rome, and then Rome peaked and it was replaced by Western Europe, and Western Europe peaked and was replaced by the United States. So let's see what happens with us. There's a continuation here. But we cannot hate each other if we want to survive. That's my message to all your generation of feminists, is that don't blame men for your problems.
Yeah.
Don't blame society for what happens to you. Yes, if something random happens and something bad happens, that's a crime, that's different.
Yes, of course.
But, you make your own bed, as they say, and then you have to lie in it. So I think a strong, realistic approach towards life is what's called for by your generation, and I would urge you to read these classics. At the end of this book, at the end of Fiery Angel, I'll hold it up here, we can get a shot of it in a bit. That's St. Michael sending Satan to hell. I list all the works that I discussed in both books. So very handy, very easily accessible is a bibliography that lists every single thing. And I've read every single book on this list. I've listened to every single piece of music. I've seen every painting, etc. I highly recommend just going like this and finding something and look at it, because it will teach you a much more important life lesson than you're getting from the media today or your friends. You're in the grips of insanity, and you need to pull out. Not you personally, but you, everybody.
I mean, I guess going back to Christianity, and I guess the core belief of Christianity is do unto others what you would do to you. And then I think about the key phrase of Satanism, which is do what thou will, which means whatever you want to will yourself to do it. If it feels good, but it doesn't matter.
Well, that's a 60s famous trope. If it feels good, do it. But we've seen now the downside to that.
When I think about, people like Harvey Weinstein, these weren't people that were treating others the way they wanted to be treated. These are people who were doing what they wanted.
Yes. And who's defending him? Nobody.
No, of course not. But, if we're going to be a Christian nation and if we're going to promote Christianity...
Well, we're not an entirely Christian nation, but we do share certain, say, Judeo-Christian principles, among which you've just mentioned one, the Golden Rule, right?
I would say, Japan is a Buddhist nation, because it's 60%.
Shinto Buddhism, yeah.
Yeah. So, if a majority of a population is a religion,
yeah, but I'm just saying specifically. But go ahead, make
we are a democracy in a sense, but I don't know. I guess it's just we can't let people do whatever the fuck they want, and how do we stop people from going too far and just doing whatever they want?
Well, we don't. We have laws against criminal behavior. But people have to control themselves. You can't have a fascist society. That was the Soviet Union. That was Nazi Germany. That was a place where you were only allowed to think one way and you're only allowed to act a certain way. And they both destroyed themselves. So we have to rely on an educated population that's been inculcated with some moral values other than relativism, other than critical theory. And we will only have a good country if we are worthy of it. You can't impose goodness on people.
No, of course not. It's very true. And I think the more people try and do that, the worse people become.
Yes, of course.
We're so ingrained to rebel. And it's in our nature to rebel. And it's just, and I think rebelling against our nature, in a sense, can be a really good thing when it's applied to... I don't think I'm a rebellious person. And I think I go along with the flow of things pretty much as I've been taught. And I'm not rebelling against it. I'm just completely submitting.
Well, you can rebel against what you think doesn't suit you, but in the context of an overall moral life. Well, here endeth the lesson, as David Mamet writes in The Untouchables, right? Yeah, we all have to learn this sometimes the hard way. My advocacy is to use the arts to learn a lesson. Is your heart broken in love? Read Goethe. Read The Sorrows of Young Werther, right?
Yeah.
That's what it's about. Guy's in love with a girl. She marries another guy. He's miserable. He kills himself. Okay, so that was a book tremendously influential in the early 19th century. And young men all over Europe killed themselves after reading the book because they felt that they identified with poor Werther. Other people said, gee, I don't want to be that crazy. And there's always another girl coming down the road, like another bus, so maybe I better not kill myself over her. But artists have already been there before. They've lived this. They've imagined it, but they've created it at the same time. And that's why I advocate people going back and re-educating themselves, because they'll learn a lot of life lessons free of charge at your local library or online or wherever books are sold or art galleries exist, and just do it. Movies teach us a lot of lessons too. Basic movies all teach the same lesson, which is totally the opposite of communal values. They're about heroes. They're about people, as I said, in strong states of emotion. They're about people who have to rise to the occasion, because there's no movie if at the end of Act 1 the hero or the heroine's life isn't radically altered and they have to do something to try to restore the status quo or change it into something better. But we watch the movie because they're going to go through, in Act 2, terrible trials, and by Act 3 it's going to look like there's no hope to save them, and then they manage to pull it out, or not, in the end. But that's the arc of every movie structure. You and I have talked about this many times. And that's what makes plays work. It's what makes drama work. And drama is our way of explaining ourselves to us. So thanks very much, Caroline.
Thank you, Michael.
You're welcome.
Well, that was Michael Walsh, and he wrote The Fiery Angel, Art, Culture, Sex, Politics, and the Struggle for the Soul of the West by
Me.
Thank you for watching. Michael, thank you so much. This was such a huge favor and such a huge support. He didn't have to be here for me. He didn't have to do this. Michael has a very busy day today. Thank you for supporting me and helping me with my podcast. Yep.